and they buy the dog, but they don't realize that, they're busy all day, and puppies are a lot of work. And so patience is the #1 rule when it comes to training. Patience, trust, and technique, obviously.
For 7 seasons, Brandon McMillan was the reason people watched Lucky Dog. Then, without warning, he was just gone. 182 episodes, 3 Emmy Awards, a show he built from nothing. Then, silence, followed by an exit announcement that came from him directly, not from the network. Fans assumed the worst: a falling out, a firing, something the show didn't want them to know. The real reason was something else entirely. And once he finally said it out loud, it explained a lot more than just why he left. The episode nobody knew was the last one. Somewhere on the Lucky Dog Ranch in the fall of 2020, Brandon McMillan wrapped filming on an episode that looked exactly like every other one before it. A rescued dog, a training session, a family waiting to fall in love. Nothing on camera signaled an ending. Behind the scenes, though, McMillan already knew something the audience did not. That episode, the 182nd he had filmed for the series, would be his last. He didn't announce it on set. He didn't give the crew a farewell speech. Instead, weeks later, he posted the news directly to his fans on his own terms through social media. No press release drafted by a network, no sit-down interview arranged by a publicist. Just Brandon, speaking straight to the people who had watched him rescue dog after dog since the show first premiered back in 2013. The timing mattered. Lucky Dog wasn't some struggling show quietly canceled for low ratings. It was an Emmy-winning hit, a series that had turned an unassuming animal trainer into one of the most recognizable faces in dog rescue television. Walking away from something that successful, at the height of its popularity, is not a normal career move. People don't casually exit a hit show they built from nothing. So when the news broke that Brandon McMillan was done, the reaction wasn't mild curiosity. It was genuine disbelief. Fans scrambled for answers immediately. Was he pushed out? Was there a falling out with producers? Had something happened to him personally? For weeks, nobody outside his inner circle actually knew. All the public had was the fact itself. The man synonymous with Lucky Dog was leaving Lucky Dog, and he wasn't sticking around to explain himself on camera. That silence didn't last. When McMillan finally did explain what happened, he didn't hide behind vague corporate language or a polished non-answer. He said exactly what he thought had gone wrong, in blunt terms rarely heard from someone stepping away from a hit series. What he described wasn't really about the dogs at all. It was about what happens to a passion project the moment it becomes profitable enough for other people to want a piece of it. What fans started noticing on screen. Before McMillan ever explained himself publicly, longtime viewers had already started picking up on something shifting in the show itself. Lucky Dog had always felt raw, real. A guy in a ball cap working one-on-one with a scared, unadoptable shelter dog, using patience and skill instead of gimmicks. That was the entire appeal. As the seasons went on, though, the show around him started to feel different. More product placement crept into episodes, more polish. More of the show's runtime seemed dedicated to things that had nothing to do with the dog on the table in front of him. None of this was invented by frustrated fans looking for something to complain about. McMillan himself would later confirm it directly, describing the change as the show becoming a carbon copy ripoff of what he and his original team had built from the ground up, and pointing specifically to product placement replacing story. Here's the thing about a successful reality series. Success invites more decision-makers, not fewer. A modest little rescue show that started small in 2013 doesn't stay a small operation once it becomes a hit. Bigger budgets get approved. More sponsors sign on. More executives get seats at the table, each with their own opinion about what the show should be doing. McMillan would later describe this exact dynamic, almost word for word, framing it as Hollywood's tendency to take a genuinely good idea and slowly convert it into a money-driven business once enough people realize there's money to be made. For an animal trainer whose entire identity was built on hands-on, unscripted authenticity, That shift wasn't a minor annoyance. It struck at the very thing that made the show worth doing in the first place. He had never set out to build a marketing vehicle. He had set out to save dogs that shelters had already given up on, one animal at a time, and to show viewers exactly how that process worked, without the gloss. That tension between the show he had built and the show it was becoming didn't resolve itself quietly. It built for years, season after season, until McMillan reached a point where continuing to show up simply wasn't something he could justify anymore. When he finally decided to walk, he made sure his fans heard the real reason directly from him, not filtered through a network statement. The moment he said it out loud. When Brandon McMillan finally addressed his departure directly, he didn't soften it. Writing to fans through his own social media in October of 2020, he laid out a timeline stretching back 7 years, describing how a production company had originally approached him because they wanted to showcase his genuine passion for training dogs with real purpose. At the time, he happened to be working with a dog named Apollo. The team was sold instantly. Filming began not long after. For a while, by his own account, it worked exactly as intended. Then, gradually, it stopped working the same way. As the years passed, he explained, real money started flowing into the show. And with real money came more people involved in decisions that used to be simple. More cooks in the kitchen, in his own words. This, he said plainly, is where Hollywood takes a genuinely good idea and slowly turns it into a business built around money rather than mission. He didn't stop there. He connected that shift directly to why he could no longer stay. Once the fun gets stripped out of a television show, he explained, it stops being something worth showing up for. That is about as direct an answer as a departing host can give. Not a scheduling conflict, not a quiet contract dispute buried in legal language. A creative and emotional breaking point, stated in his own words, aimed squarely at the direction his own show had taken. He closed that announcement the way he'd hosted the series for 7 years, emotionally and without pretense. He said he had always made it a point to wear his heart on his sleeve, refusing to hold back what he genuinely felt, because staying real for his viewers mattered more to him than performing a role. This wasn't just a television program to him, he said. It was a serious mission that had saved the lives of hundreds of dogs, and as far as he was concerned, that mission had already succeeded. But he was careful to frame this as an ending for the show, not for the work itself. This is not the end, he told his fans directly. It's just the beginning. That single line reframed everything. He wasn't retiring from dog rescue. He was walking away from a version of it that no longer matched what he'd set out to build. That level of candor is rare enough on its own. What made it land even harder was who was saying it. This was not a first-time host testing the waters of fame, unsure of his own value to a production. McMillan had been working with animals professionally since he was 18 years old, trained inside a family that had built its own career around animal work before he ever stepped in front of a camera. He understood exactly what he was giving up when he walked away from a hit show. And he understood exactly what kind of leverage that gave his words once he finally decided to use them. A newer host might have stayed quiet, worried about burning a bridge back into the industry. McMillan clearly wasn't worried about that. That distinction mattered enormously for what came next. A man that committed to the mission itself, and that's secure in his own reputation, doesn't just disappear. Life after the ranch. Leaving Lucky Dog did not mean leaving dogs behind. If anything, McMillan seemed determined to prove the opposite almost immediately. He teased as much in his own farewell message, telling fans that wherever his next adventure took him, they would be coming along for that journey too, and that together they would find another dog worth saving, one at a time, the same way they always had. He didn't waste time following through. McMillan launched his own dog training masterclasses, giving everyday pet owners direct access to the same techniques he had spent years demonstrating on camera. In 2021, he published a new book titled The Story of Dog, adding to a body of published work that already included his earlier release, Lucky Dog Lessons, Train Your Dog in 7 Days, which had come out back in 2016 and walked readers through the same rapid training methods he'd used on the series itself. He also moved into product development, becoming an entrepreneur with the launch of Link, a smart pet wearable designed to track a dog's activity while also using tones and vibrations to support real-time training through positive reinforcement. It was a natural extension of everything he'd spent his career doing, just delivered through hardware instead of a television screen, letting owners apply his reinforcement-based approach without him standing in the room. None of this happened in isolation from his rescue work either. Years earlier, McMillan had co-founded the Argus Service Dog Foundation, an organization dedicated to training and providing service dogs specifically for disabled military veterans. That work continued running in the background throughout his post-Lucky Dog years, a reminder that the mission he'd described in his farewell post was never just a talking point. Then came the detour almost nobody saw coming. Rather than immediately chasing another dog-focused series, McMillan signed on to host a completely different kind of show for the Discovery Channel, Great White Serial Killer, a program about one of the ocean's most feared predators, about as far from a rescue dog ranch as a television concept can get. The title alone stirred its own minor controversy, drawing criticism from viewers and conservation-minded commentators who felt branding a shark documentary around the word killer undercut the very animal the show was meant to explore. For a man who had built his entire public image around gentle, patient rehabilitation, fronting a series built on a deliberately provocative title was an unusual pivot. Even if the underlying subject matter still centered on an animal he clearly respected. At the time, when asked whether he'd ever return to something like Lucky Dog, his answer was carefully conditional. If it was the right show, built around the right idea, he said, of course he would do it. Just not yet. That "not yet" held for 3 full years. The comeback nobody expected. By late 2023, "Not Yet" quietly became "Now." On September the 19th, 2023, production group Hearst Media Production announced something that had seemed unlikely for years. Brandon McMillan was officially returning to host Lucky Dog again, stepping back into the role for the show's 11th season after 3 full years away. The premiere date carried its own quiet symbolism. The season, rebranded as Lucky Dog Reunions, was set to debut on October the 7th, arriving almost exactly 3 years after his original farewell post had gone up in October of 2020. This wasn't framed as a simple relaunch either. The entire concept of the new season centered on revisiting some of the most meaningful moments from McMillan's original 7 seasons as host. Watching those old placements back alongside the audience, then reconnecting with each family to see how their adopted dog had actually changed their life in the years since. The return also meant stepping back into a show that had kept moving without him. In his absence, husband and wife trainers Eric Wise and Rashi Khanna Wise had taken over hosting duties starting with Season 8 in January of 2021, building their own following with the series over the following 3 seasons. Eric had been training dogs since he was 15 and had spent years rehabilitating animals at a Los Angeles rescue before joining the show, while Rashi brought a background in psychology and social work to the pair's approach to canine behavior. Their presence meant McMillan wasn't simply stepping back into an empty chair. He was returning to a series that had proven it could survive without him, which made the decision to bring him back for a dedicated reunion format feel even more deliberate. The season premiere itself was built around a story with real emotional weight, timed deliberately to coincide with Breast Cancer Awareness Month in October, spotlighting a breast cancer survivor whose life had been shaped by the pet she'd adopted through the show. According to the production group's executive vice president, the goal was straightforward: give longtime fans exactly what they'd been asking for since McMillan left. Real updates on the dogs and families they'd watched years earlier, with the original host there to make the reunion feel complete rather than staged. For a show that had spent 3 years operating under new hosts, bringing McMillan back specifically for a reunion-formatted season was a deliberate acknowledgement of something the network could no longer ignore. Fans had never fully stopped missing him. McMillan, despite walking away from a hit show over exactly this kind of decision-making, had clearly decided this particular version of the concept, built around real reconnection instead of manufactured drama, was worth saying yes to. Why this story is bigger than one TV host. Here's what actually mattered. Brandon McMillan didn't leave Lucky Dog because he stopped caring about rescue dogs. And he didn't leave because of some hidden scandal fans were never told about. He left because the show that started as an unfiltered, mission-driven passion project slowly turned into something shaped by sponsors, executives, and profit margins, until the version of the show he was hosting no longer resembled the one he'd set out to build. That is a far more ordinary explanation than most viewers expected when they first heard the words "shocking exit." But ordinary doesn't mean unimportant. It's a story that plays out constantly behind the scenes of reality television, just rarely explained this directly by the person walking away. Most departing hosts issue a vague statement about pursuing new opportunities and let speculation fill in the rest. McMillan instead spelled out exactly what broke his trust in the project, naming the money, the added layers of decision-makers, and the loss of authenticity as the actual reasons, not euphemisms standing in for something else entirely. This is not a pattern unique to one dog trainer either. Across reality television, it is a familiar arc. A specific creative vision draws in an audience. That audience draws in advertisers, and advertisers slowly reshape the format around what sells rather than what originally worked. Hosts typically respond to that shift in one of two ways. Some adapt quietly and keep collecting a paycheck. Others simply disappear without ever explaining why, leaving fans to fill in the blanks with speculation. McMillan chose a rarer third option. He said the uncomfortable part out loud, put his name on it publicly, and walked away from guaranteed income to do it. What makes the story land, though, isn't just the honesty of the exit. It's what he did with the years in between. He didn't disappear from the mission he described in that farewell post. He built training programs, wrote books, developed a product meant to help everyday owners train their own dogs, and kept the Argus Service Dog Foundation running for veterans who needed it. When Great White serial killer briefly pulled him into an entirely different world, even that felt less like abandoning his cause and more like a working animal professional taking on a new challenge, while the door back to rescue work stayed open on his own terms. It also helps to remember where he started. A kid learning animal training at 18 inside a family, already doing that work, doesn't usually end up walking away from guaranteed television success on principle. That kind of decision comes from somewhere deeper than career strategy. 3 daytime Emmy wins for the same show, earned across consecutive years starting in 2015, gave him every incentive most people would need to stay quiet and keep collecting a paycheck. He didn't. That says something about where his priorities actually sat, long before the exit post ever went up. When that door finally reopened in 2023, it reopened on a format built specifically around reconnection, revisiting old placements, and checking in on dogs and families years later, rather than simply picking up where the show had left off. That structure alone suggests the network had absorbed the lesson from his original departure. The emotional human connection was always the actual product, not the polish surrounding it. Brandon McMillan's exit from Lucky Dog was never really about him disappearing. It was about a genuine mission briefly getting buried under the business built on top of it, and one man deciding he would rather walk away and rebuild it on his own terms than keep showing up for a version of it he no longer recognized. Do you think Lucky Dog ever really needed anyone else at all? Or was Brandon McMillan the one thing the show could never actually replace? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.